So did you really, who thought I could really juggle? Did anybody? Good. Because no. That is, I can't do that. I'm not a coordinator. It doesn't matter. We're talking about our purpose tonight, okay? Are you ready? Do you have the notes? Okay, you don't have to, there are no blanks to fill in. I filled them in for you. You're supposed to say, well, thank you, Pastor Mike. That's really nice of you. You know, we really appreciate that. Let me tell you a story. Old Pete had a knack for catching fish. Every weekend, old Pete went fishing, and he returned every weekend with dozens upon dozens of fish, right up to the limit. Nobody knew how he did it. Other fishermen would go out on the same day and were unable to catch anything, or maybe just one or two, but not old Pete. He always came back with a stringer full of freshly caught fish. Curious, the fish and game warden decided to investigate. He followed old Pete out to the lake, and when old Pete launched his boat at the dock, or got into his boat at the dock, the warden was standing right there, and he said, "Oh, hey, Pete, can I just come along for a ride?" Well, old Pete said, "Sure, just hop right in." So old Pete started up his outboard motor, and off they went. And when they arrived at this obscure part of the lake, Pete stopped the boat. And the warden, he's sitting there in the front, and he's watching, and he was thinking, maybe it's this particular section of the lake. Maybe Pete's going to use some special bait. Well, old Pete, after dropping the anchor, he commenced to fishing. He reached into his tackle box, and he pulled out this long, slender red stick with a fuse hanging out of one end. He lit it, and he tossed it into the water, and after the explosion, dead fish soon started rising to the surface. Old Pete took out a net, started scooping them up. "Wait a minute," the warden said. "What do you think you're doing? Don't you know that I'm the game warden and I'm going to put you in jail? You're going to be paying every fine in the book, and you will never fish again." Old Pete, he just calmly sat there in the back of the boat, put down his net, reached back into his tackle box, picked up the second stick of dynamite, lit it, tossed it into the warden's lap. Said, "Mr. Warden, I don't know about you, but I think it's time to shut up and fish." Not a true story, don't worry. Is it time to start fishing? It's time to be what God called us to be. Brad Powell is pastor of a Northridge church in Detroit, and he said this: "Here's the church as it should be. Alive, not dead. Love, not hate. Forgiving, not condemning. Truth, not tradition. Freedom, not bondage. Acceptance, not rejection. Desire, not duty. Transformation, not modification. Authentic, not hypocritical. Relevant, not irrelevant. People, not place. And relationships, not religion." You see, there comes a time in our lives, a time where it's time to stop talking and to start doing. Time to stop talking about our faith and time to begin to act upon our faith. Time to stop talking about quitting this or that, or changing this or that, or doing this or that, and simply beginning to do it. Time to stop resting on the past blessings and yesterday's miracles and go on to some new miracles. Time to stop feasting on the leftovers and move to a table of new blessings. It's time to move into the life that God intends us to have. And that's a life of purpose. John Maxwell, he was a former pastor, and now he's this leadership guru. He talks a lot about being intentional and about intentional living. And he said this: intentional living is leading a life of purpose on purpose. Do you hear that? It's leading a life of purpose on purpose. He goes on and he says we're called to make a difference in this world, to impact people and the people and places we find ourselves in all along the journey of our lives. He also said clarity of vision creates clarity of priorities. So what's my purpose? What is this clarity of vision that I need to keep right in front of me? It's to figure out what God's purpose is. But before I can figure out God's purpose, here's what I need to do. Step number 1. You got it on your papers. Are you ready? This is a toughie. Step number 1 is make up your mind that I will follow him. Is that tough? Well, it can be, can't it? But it's just make up my mind that I am going to follow him. David did that. David tells us, in fact, the Psalms 143, verse 8, David says, he's talking to God, and he says, let me hear of your unfailing love each morning, for I am doing what? Trusting you. I need to make up my mind that I'm going to follow God, and that means every morning I'm going to say, God, I'm trusting in you today. It's not easy some days, is it? But I have to make up my mind. I'm going to make up my mind. I am trusting you. And then David goes on and he says, and show me where to walk. If I want to look and follow and know God's purpose in my life, I've got to make up my mind that I'm going to follow him, which means I'm going to say, God, you show me where to walk. It's not by accident that you happen to be in the grocery line next to a certain person. Understand that. Not if you prayed this. It's not an accident that you just happen to walk out of your house the same time that your neighbor does. Not if you ask God this. So I need to do that. I need to say, God, I'm trusting in you, so show me where to walk. See, and the first part of finding my purpose is to decide now that I'm going to follow God. Daniel is a great example of this. Daniel in the Old Testament. The context of the story where we go in Daniel chapter 1, it's where the king at the time had ordered one of his servants to gather all the perfect Israelite men to come and live in his palace. And now, did you catch that? All the perfect, so he would have came and got all of us. Careful. I hear those whispers. He was to gather all these perfect Israelite men to come and live in his palace, eat his food, and be indoctrinated into his ways. And then after a few years, they would be given places of authority. So Daniel, along with a few of his friends, was brought in. And once that indoctrination process began, the special food was brought out, the table was set, Daniel had a decision to make. And in Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, it says, but Daniel determined that he would not defile himself by eating the king's food or drinking his wine. Now, so he stopped right there. Do you think for a moment that Daniel just on the spur said, oh, I'm not going to eat that? The Good News translation says, well, Daniel had made up his mind. Daniel had made up his mind. Just like you and I need to make up our mind right now that I'm going to follow God, Daniel had already made up his mind that I am going to follow God. I'm not going to defile myself. And Daniel chooses to not eat. That was a huge thing. You know, you don't just stand up in the king's courts or in the king's palace and say, oh, I'm not going to do what the king wants me to do. But he had already made up his mind. And although Daniel was in a culture that did not honor God, he was still going to obey God. Others around Daniel caved in, but Daniel was going to obey God. Why? Because he had already made up his mind. So the question comes to me, have I resolved to pursue the purposes of God? Because resolve is a strong word, and it means I am being devoted to that principle, and I am committed to my course of action. Lord, I am going to follow your steps. It's interesting. It's easy to resist temptation if I have thought through my convictions well before the temptation arrives. Did you catch that? You know what else? It's easier to know which direction to turn if you have already decided on the destiny. My destiny is heaven. Your destiny is heaven. That should make the decisions and the directions that we turn so much easier if we just keep that. Because listen, when you came to church tonight, you had your destination in mind. So what did it do? When you came to a stoplight, you knew whether you were supposed to go straight or turn right or turn left, didn't you? Because you had already determined, I'm going to church. What if you just get in the car and start driving? You don't know when to turn. Make up your mind. I need to make up my mind before it ever begins. John Grisham, he's this author. I know you've heard of him. I love reading his stuff. But he said this. He said, don't write the first scene until you know the final scene. Because if you know the final scene, it's hard to get lost. I am not going to get lost in my pursuit of following after God because I know what the final scene is. Daniel and his friends knew the final scene, and they made their decision to be faithful to God before they were ever faced with the king's delicacies. So they didn't hesitate to stick with their convictions when the pressures came. Now, I don't know about you, but it would have been an incredibly difficult time for me choosing the carrots and the broccoli over the barbecue ribs that were sitting on the table in front of them, if that's what it was. But it was probably something close. Suzanne and I were at a restaurant a while back, and I went into this restaurant with my mind already made up. I wanted a cheeseburger. I love cheeseburgers. I wanted it loaded. I knew exactly what I wanted on it. I wanted it yay thick. I wanted it juicy. I wanted it medium well, so it's still a little pink in the middle, so it still drips out. I wanted certain sauce. And I wanted the fries. I knew exactly what I wanted. Until I sat down, and then the menu came. Now I'm opening the menu, and there it is. There's too many choices. I could have nachos. I could have steak. I could have salad. Well, the salad really wasn't tempting. I didn't have to worry about that. But I had resolved. What had happened, though? I had resolved I was going to have a cheeseburger. So you know what I did? I could close up the menu. I didn't even have to think about it. The decision had already been made. And I got me a cheeseburger. And I was happy. Have I made the decision already? Have I made the decision already? Have I made up my mind that I am going to follow God? That God, I want you to direct my steps. God, I want you to show me the path because that's where I'm going to go. See, the pressure magnified in our daily lives because we are assaulted by pressures all around us, pressures of compromising our standards, giving in to temptation, living more like the world. Merely wanting or preferring God's will is not enough to stand against this onslaught of temptation. I need to make up my mind. So, which leads us to the second thing, because we're talking about pursuing Him, and we're talking about finding our purpose. So first of all, I need to make up my mind. The second thing, and you have it before you, the second step is this: figure out my purpose, and here I'm going to tell you your purpose. Are you ready? Mind-blowing. Just get ready. Take a deep breath. You can let it out. You don't have to hold it. Here's your purpose: to do all for the glory of God. Mind blown? It's so simple. We always want these I need to have this purpose and lay it out and all these. This is it. My purpose. God created me to do this. That everything I do, let it be done for the glory of God. Let's back up just a minute. God called us. God chose us. We read it, John 15:16. He called us. He chose us to go and bear a special kind of fruit, a fruit that will last forever. It's the kingdom principle. It's the kingdom fruit. And in 1 Corinthians 4, verse 1 and 2, it says, let a man so consider us as servants of Christ, stewards of the mysteries. Moreover, it is required in stewards that one be found faithful. See, we are not only children of God, but we're also servants of Christ. We are also here to do his work. And if I want to know my purpose and want to be found faithful, which we all want to be found faithful, it's simply that. Because my purpose is less about where I am and less about what I am doing, what my title is, who signs my paycheck, who I call boss, and my purpose is more about who I am and who I'm representing. That's my purpose. It's everything I do to glorify God. It's not about where I am, but it's about who I am. You know, it took me a long time to realize this. And realize that every day I was being found faithful and I was following his purpose the 10 years that I was working at Lowe's. In fact, I had to remind myself every morning or afternoon, depending on which shift I was working that day, I had to remind myself that I was fulfilling God's purpose for my life. And it wasn't because of where I was, but it was because of who I was and who I was representing. In fact, I had 4 or 5 playlists. You know, that's where you have a bunch of songs put together. I had 4 or 5 playlists on my phone that I would listen to, and it was just a 3 or 4 song playlist because that was all I lived from work. I only lived 3 or 4 songs away from work. But every morning I would listen to one of those work playlists. I called them Work Playlist 1, Work Playlist 2. I was real creative back then. But it worked because they were songs of praise. They were songs of purpose. They were songs of strength. They were songs of hope. They were songs of encouragement that led me into my day, that reminded me that when I went to work that day, I was fulfilling his purpose because it wasn't about where I was. It was about whose I was, who I am, and who I represented. And those songs put me in that right mindset. And I started every shift, before I ever put on that Lowe's red vest, I slowly walked the floor greeting everybody that I saw, every worker that I saw. I would ask them questions. I'd call them by name. I'd ask them how their kids were doing, how their wife or husband was doing. I would talk to them, and I would listen to their stories. I was letting them know that somebody in that building cared for them. See, my purpose, again, do you see how I was fulfilled? It took me a while. I'm being honest. Don't ask Suzanne, because she'll go through bad times if remembering all these days that I hate work. But I was fulfilling God's purpose in my life because I was representing him. And it was more than just a job. And I want you to know something. Wherever you work, it's not just a job. It's not just a paycheck. It really isn't, because it's not about your purpose. We talk and over, well, I need to know my purpose. That's your purpose. God put you there for a reason. Maybe it's just one person that sits next to you. Maybe it's one person that rides in the truck with you. Maybe it is one customer that you come into contact with. But you are there because you have already made up your mind and said, God, I'm going to follow you. You are there, placed by God, there in that place to represent him. So I'm going to do everything for the glory of God. And the other day, I was at a different Lowe's, and I saw some old friends that I had worked with for several years there. They hugged me. Yuck. No, it wasn't bad. I hadn't seen them in 3 or 4 years, and you know what they told me? They said, oh, Mike, things have changed so much. Things have changed so much since you left. But you know what? I realized something. It wasn't that I was such a great guy, even though I am. It wasn't that I was such a great guy. It was what I had in here that was coming out to them. It was who I was representing every single day. That's what was missed. That's what they missed. I was being found faithful because I was doing what God put me on earth to do. And that is to do everything for the glory of God. It comes from 1 Corinthians 10:31. Whatever you do, whatever. Now what is whatever? It's whatever. Whatever you do it for what? For the glory of God. So what's my purpose? My purpose is simply to do everything for the glory of God. Because see, God has created me with a certain shape. Rick Warren in his Purpose-Driven Life talks about this. And if you've never read it, look it up. Go online and just look for shape. Put in shape, S-H-A-P-E, by Rick Warren. And it'll give you a whole list of things. But it's a great thing because it talks about our shape. And God has created each one of us. It's what we said, what I said in the children's message. God has created every one of us unique. He's given us spiritual gifts. He's given me my heart, which your heart is different than my heart, and it's good. He's given abilities. Your abilities are different than my abilities, but that's great. He's given you a different personality than me. And everybody says amen on that one. And he's given me experiences, and that's the shape that God has created me. And am I using my shape for the glory of God? That's the question. That's the question. Okay, go to that last slide, will you, Phil? No, there's one more. Well, I'm not done preaching, don't worry. Now, here. I want you to know something. Everybody take a deep breath and let it out. I want you to know this heavy burden of trying to figure out what your purpose in life, it's now gone. Because it's as simple as this. You were created to represent God. You were created to be his hands extended. You were created to share those words of hope, those words of love with the person that you work next to. Your purpose is not about where, but it's about who you are and who you're representing. So my purpose, who? We'll do the who, what, where, when, and why. Who? Whoever he places before me. So you getting your purpose? It's not difficult. What? Whatever my hand finds to do. Yeah, but some of you are saying, yeah, but you don't know the job I work. You don't know the environment. Yes, yeah, you know what? The light shines brightest in the darkness, doesn't it? And it may be hard. I'm telling you, I had some hard days at Lowe's. Lowe's is not a Christian workplace. Can I say that? Sure, I can say that. It's not. And I had some hard, dark days, but you know what? That's when my light shined the brightest. And sure, I got discouraged. I did. I'd go home and I'd like, oh, Suzanne, I can't take this anymore. I did. But she would remind me, and God would speak to me in my spirit and say, no. You're fulfilling my purpose because you're doing everything to my glory. So we've got the who, we got the what, the where? Wherever he plants you. And understand something you've already said. I've made up my mind that I'm going to follow him. So get ready because he's going to plant you where he wants you. He's going to plant you where he needs you. The when? Oh, really? Every day? All the time? Yeah. Doesn't mean that we're not real, because we are. We're real. People at Lowe's, they saw me get aggravated. I told them one day, I said, oh, that made me so mad I almost cussed. And they looked at me and they started laughing. They say, you would never do that. I can't believe that. Why? Every day. But they saw who I was. And they saw who I represented. And why? That is my purpose. Whatever I do it all for the glory of God. And that's his word. Father, thank you for your word tonight. Thank you for your purpose. Thank you for opening our eyes and our hearts and our spirits to see that everywhere I go, everything I do, I am there for a reason. And that's to glorify you. In your precious name, amen. There we go. The first one was written by a guy named Michael Neal, worship leader, choir leader. The second one is done by Michael W. Smith. So see, I'm staying in the Michael theme, so that's good. Oh God, you are the God of all created things. Before the worlds were formed, you knew who I would be. Your ways are higher than the ways of man. So help me trust your heart as you hold my hand on mountains high. I'll praise your name in valleys low. I'll do the same. And as a river runs to find the ocean blue, my heart will always run to find you. Sing that chorus with me if you want to. On mountains high, I'll praise your name. In valleys low, I'll do the same. And as a river runs to find the ocean blue, my heart will always run to find you. For you're all I want, and you're all I've ever needed. You're all I want. Help me know you are near. So draw me close to you. So draw me close to you. And never let me go. I lay it all down again to hear you say that I'm your friend. You are my desire. You are my desire. And no one else will do. 'Cause no one else can take your place, to feel the warmth of your embrace, and help me find the way, lead me back to you. You're all I want, and you're and you're all I've ever needed. You're all I want. again. You're all I want. You're all I want. And you're all I've ever needed. And you're all I want. Help me know you are near. Amen. Good stuff. Stand with me, would you? Together, the Apostles' Creed. I believe
In God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. I believe in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord. He was conceived by the power